Hey guys, and welcome to the February 2016 edition of Casual MTG, a monthly series I do here on the Neat Zone Magic channel, where I talk about a deck that's mostly intended for kitchen table play. They're usually very budget. This one, for example, is under 15 tickets on Magic Online. But they're a lot of fun to play, and they're usually built around some weird card or mechanic or something weird's going on. They're not decks that you see all the time or anything like that. They're just decks that are for fun, but I do want to stress they're not really for Friday Night Magic, although I think this deck actually with few upgrades is more capable of playing well in Friday Night Magic than most of them. Before I get into talking about the deck, I want to say that my videos are also posted on paperchampion.net. If you found my videos there, then great. And if you're not familiar with paperchampion.net, it's a great Magic the Gathering website with lots of other great Magic the Gathering content, and you should check it out. Anyway, we'll get into the deck. I'm calling it my five-color Bladeknight deck, and that's because it runs a bunch of cards from a Lara block, one of which is a knight, and the others have Blade in their names. And it's a five-color deck, and you'd think you wouldn't be able to build a five-color mana base that's consistent enough on a budget, but you actually can. It's not. This is the area of the deck that I think if it was upgraded, this deck would actually be relatively competitive at Friday Night Magics, but I have a pretty budget five-color build. Ancient Ziggurat is fairly cheap. It can only add mana of any color for creatures, so my deck, it does have 24 creatures, so it can sometimes end up biting the deck in the butt in the fact that I don't have the mana for, if I want to cast Terminate, for example, and I only have 2 lands and one's a Ziggurat, but it makes my mana pretty consistent for all my creatures. I have 4 Mirrodin's Cores, which are a little bit slow, and wow, I just recorded this. They've updated the adding colorless mana to your mana pool symbol, I see. This one, it has to tap once to get a charge counter, and then it can add mana of any color. So it's kind of like a land that comes into play tap that can add mana of any color. Pillar of the Perins is the most expensive land in the deck, and it costs about a ticket and a half on Magic Online. It adds 1 mana of any color to my mana pool, but only for multicolored spells. As you can see, the whole deck is gold, so that's not a problem. And then I have 2 each of all the Vivid lands, which are very cheap. They all add 1 colored mana. Depending on which part of the cycle they are, and then they have 2 charge counters that can be removed to add color, any mana of any color, and they come into play tap. So the deck has a bit of a slow mana base, but if you're trying to build budget, I think this is one of the best things you can do for a budget mana base. Obviously, if there were Mana Confluences or City of Brasses, those would be better than a lot of what we have going on here, but those are very expensive, and that's not really the point of this video series. I'm trying to show you how to build decks. You can build weird decks relatively cheaply. And so because of the 5-color nature of this deck, it can basically run like some of the best cards in Modern. For example, I have 4 Terminates, which aren't really a problem to cast most of the time, and it can kill any creature basically, except the one with hexproof, and 4 Lightning Helixes. And that does 3 damage, and I gain 3 life to a creature or player if you don't know what it does on the full art there. And then I also just run a lot of flexible cards. I have 2 each of some charms. I have 2 Azorius charms, which allow me to, do a number of things. Gain life if I need to win a race, draw a card if I need to, or use it as removal against the opponent's creature. A Zet charm, which can be used as a counter spell in a pinch, do 2 damage to something, or help me dig for a card. I mostly only use the first 2 modes in this deck. And Simic charm, which can save all my creatures from removal, or other permanents, actually. Pump a creature or bounce a creature. So that's sort of the non-creature part of the deck. The rest of the deck we're going to talk about is all creatures. And the reason I call it Bladeknight is I have 4 Esper Stormblades, 4 Naya Hushblades, and 4 Bant Sureblades. And they all have a bunch of synergy with one another because they all get some special effect if you control another multicolored permanent, and this deck controls them most of the time. Esper Stormblade is either a black or a white, and a blue, has to be a blue, and then it gets +1/+1 and flying. It's a 2/1 already if you control a multicolored permanent, so it becomes a 3/2 flyer. Naya Hushblade, either a red or a white, and a green, and it becomes a 3/2 with Shroud if you have a multicolored permanent. And Bant Sureblade, who's 2 mana for a 2/1 like they all are, either a green or a blue, and a white, and he becomes a 3/2 with First Strike if you control a multicolored permanent. On top of that, I have a couple 3-drops that are multicolored. Rock's Warmonk, who's a 3 mana 3/4 lifelinker, and Mantis Rider, who I'm sure you all know if you play Standard right now, a blue, red, and a white for a 3-mana 3/3 with Flying, Vigilance, and Haste. And the card that sort of is the glue of the deck, which certainly helps the deck win, but doesn't necessarily need to happen just because the deck's filled with aggressively costed creatures who just destroy your opponent, in addition to having good removal, is Knight of New Alara. He's sort of the curve topper you want. Like in an ideal world, you play like a turn 2 Stormblade, which is hard to do with our mana base, but still. Turn 2 Stormblade, turn 3 Mantis Rider, and then Knight of New Alara, and suddenly your opponent is pretty close to dead. He pumps all my creatures equal to the number of colors they control, +1/+1 for each one. The colors they are, rather, and all my creatures in the deck are 3 colors except the Knight of New Alara. These count as 3 colors because of their hybrid mana. That's what it's called. So, and the Mantis Rider and Rocksworn Monk are more obviously 3 colors. The other nice thing about being a 5-color deck is we can have a very flexible sideboard. I basically tried to get in, a lot of charms because they're so flexible. I will say I thought about putting the 3-color charms in the sideboard, but with as slow as my mana can be with Mirrodin's Core and with Ancient Ziggurat, I think having 3 mana spells is asking a lot more of my mana base to make happen because the Ziggurat just can't add mana for that. So I have mostly 2 mana charms. I also run Pithing Needle. It's basically a catch-all, sideboard card. If your opponent plays a problematic card that happens to have an activated ability, you can just shut it off, and that's pretty ideal. Third is that charm in the sideboard if I feel like countering is more important. Deemer Charm, good against opponents that are more low to the ground their creatures are, and it can also counter big sorcery spells. Rakdos Charm is probably the best of all of these charms, not in terms of power level really, but in terms of all the things it can do. It's a sideboard card already in Modern, I would say. I run it in red-black decks anyway, decks that have red and black in them, because it can stop reanimation strategies like Grishol Brand, can blow up artifacts in an affinity deck, and although actually just rotated out, but once upon a time, Rakdos Charms, each creature deals 1 damage to its controller was relevant too because you could use it against Splinter Twin, let them make their infinite combos, go to combat, and then you just say Rakdos Charm and you win the game. But that's not relevant anymore, I guess, but the first 2 are still pretty relevant. And the third one, I guess, could still be, in a pinch useful, but I run 4 in the sideboard. I did make this deck, or 3, no, it is 4. I did make this deck before Splinter Twin rotated and haven't updated it since. And that might be something I would change a little bit, maybe cut 1 Rakdos Charm at least. 2 Golgari Charms, which can blow up enchantments, are good against token decks. The Regenerate thing is nice gravy. Destructive Revelry, not a charm, but a very good removal spell for artifacts for enchantments in Modern. Boros Charm is useful if I want to, if my opponent has a lot of board sweeping, Boros Charm's nice because it can save them from that. It can also be used, if I want to be more aggressive because the 4 damage and double strike thing are pretty relevant. And 2 Selesnya Charms are great for siding in against decks with big creatures, and then the other 2 effects are basically just gravy on top of that. So that is the 5-color Bladeknight deck. I'll show you what it costs, roughly. As of the end of January, anyway, it is $14.34. The thing that'll put you back the most is Lightning Helix and Terminate are both fairly costly, but I think they're worth it. But the Pillar of the Perins is the most expensive. Basically, everything else in the deck's very cheap, other than the Terminate, the Helix, and the Terminate, the Helix, and the Pillar of the Perins. That's it. Those are the ones that are expensive. So now I'll play 3 matches with this deck, as I always do, so you can see how it works. It is a pretty fun deck to play, I have to say. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.